This is Fina Akram speaking to Michael Rosen at King's Place on 24th of September 2012 at the Edward Lear event for Poetry in the City. Michael, you're a poet, you're a novelist, you've written so many books, you were Children's Poet Laureate as well, and you're also even on Radio 4. I wanted to ask you, when did you first come across Edward Lear?
Pretty sure it was at school. The reason why I hesitated a bit there is because my parents were both teachers, and I was just trying to remember if they ever read any of his poems to me when I was at home, but I can't remember them doing that. My mum and dad both used to recite poems because they knew them off by heart. I was just trying to think whether that was in their repertoire. I don't think so, so I think pretty certainly it was at school. I can remember writing down The Dong with the Luminous Nose and doing drawings for it in a sort of little anthology of my own that I made when I was about 8 or 9.
Are there any particular favourites that you have?
I like The Table and the Chair. I like pretty nearly all the limericks because I think there's something very odd about them, and I like the odd way. I'm not at all bothered by this thing that the purists go on about how the last line is not a new rhyme, apart from I think 2, possibly 3. I'm not at all bothered by that because I think he was trying to do something else. So yeah, I like the Table and the Chair. I like them very much. I like the Jumblies, I think, yes. There's something so absurd and slightly forlorn about them on this kind of meaningless journey. I wouldn't want to single out too much really, because I really do like the kind of whole body of work very much.
Why do you think Lear still continues to inspire us 200 years later?
Well, I think there's several things. First of all, what can we say about the world? The world doesn't always make sense. It sometimes seems to us very absurd, the way we human beings are or what we're here for. And then a bit more precisely, a lot of the habits and values and customs and things that we demand of people, that they have to behave in certain ways. Quite often there doesn't really seem to be a reason for it. The origins for it is quite often in religion or sort of class things. And one way to deal with that is to use what we now call surrealism. Of course, the word didn't exist in Lear's way, where you bring things that you wouldn't expect into contact with each other. So if you say you have tables and chairs, and then you say, what if the tables and chairs could walk? And, you can go forward 100 years from Lear and you can see surrealist paintings, that what if clocks could melt? And then you've got Salvador Dali painting. And then also, language seems a very odd thing, that we can say what we feel and care about, but language has its own texture. So on the one hand, it's supposed to be referring to things. So if I'm looking at this table and I call it a table or this bottle, then it's supposed to be the table and the bottle. But actually, there is this thing that is the word table that I'm saying with my lips. It's got its own identity. And I think what Lear discovered, or certainly built on the way the nursery rhymes and tongue twisters and nonsense of popular theatre, that you can draw attention to this very odd thing that we've invented, these sounds that have their own thing. So if you say tinkle bell, you can then play with the sound of it. So all that is still absolutely relevant to now.
Michael, you have an extensive presence in social media. Your Facebook page has thousands of followers. You've got clips on YouTube. How do you think the role of a writer has evolved?
I think in Edward Lear's own time, they were quite distanced from their audience. I mean, you have to qualify it a bit, because I know that Lewis Carroll, for example, Charles Dodgson, he did reply to lots of letters. I'm not sure that Edward Lear did very much. He got to know people, in a sense, in his milieu, in little groups, but he didn't have a sense, I don't think, of talking to the wider audience. But since we've invented radio, TV, and then these new electronic media, we've found a way to talking to thousands and thousands of people, on occasions millions, if you're Madonna or somebody, or Elvis Presley, talking to millions all in one go. And I suppose that literature's had to try and keep up with that and try and find ways of doing that. And I suppose with Facebook, Twitter, and radio and so on, is that audiences can feel that they own the writer. If I think in terms of popular music, there's a way in which I think when I was a teenager, I kind of owned the Rolling Stones. I didn't, they didn't know who I was, but you know what I mean? Because I liked their music and saw them on TV and had their records. Well, that's happened a bit with writers now, because you can talk to people. I would have said it's just a matter of how many, but then there does seem to be a shift in the way in which audiences do feel that they can own the writer and get to know the writer. I think quite often in the past, probably writers weren't quite so much personalities. You didn't hear them and know them and feel that you could see them. I mean, as a child, I can't think I would have recognised a single picture of a single children's author. If you put all the pictures up, I wouldn't have been able to identify any of them.
When you were Children's Laureate, how did you interpret the role? I
was trying to do several things. I was trying to make poetry as popular as it possibly could be. I wanted to encourage the idea that books are fun. And I also wanted to try and to remind people of the sort of liveliness of performance poetry. So on that tack, I tried to set up, what can you call it? Well, it was called Perform a Poem. It was trying to get children in schools to perform poems on video on a website for a kind of teaching aid, the London Grid for Learning. So I tried to do that. I set up the Roald Dahl Funny Prize, and this is the prize for the funniest books of the year. So with the Roald Dahl Foundation and Bequest, I worked with them and Book Trust to set up a prize, and we're now in its 5th year. So I'm very proud that that's happened, because it's a celebration of funny books just because they're funny. I did several other things while we were on. I tried to set up a kind of website as a sort of forum about poetry in schools. Some of it's quite difficult. Teachers are in a double bind where they have to do what's asked of them. So if you try to approach things via other means like Twitter or websites, they're a bit cautious about it. I did try to set up what I called the 20-point plan for a book-friendly or a book-loving school. There's a lot of research to show that if children are reading for pleasure and reading often, this is an immense help to them, to the school, to the teacher, to everybody. And so I thought, well, why don't I write out a kind of 20-point thing and just give it to teachers? So I did that, and that's still up on various websites. So that was the sort of areas I was working in.
How do you think your work relates to Edward Lear's work?
Well, sometimes I very specifically tried to write like Edward Lear. So I did 2 books of nonsense, and they were both really a homage to Lear. I mean, one I call Michael Rosen's book of nonsense, and the other one even more nonsense. And both of those were sort of, I looked at Edward Lear and said, oh, I'll try and be inspired by that. I'll try and write like that. So they were directly inspired. But then going back much earlier, I mean, they came out, I think, in the 90s. Going much earlier, when I was first writing, I think you have a lot of poets in your head when you sit down to write. And somewhere tucked away in there was Lear, and the idea that you could create worlds that don't exist or language that doesn't exist and then integrate that with the real world in the way that he does, that was tucked away in the back of my mind, because I knew the Jumblies well, and the Dog with the Luminous Nose, Owl and the Pussycat, of course, a lot of the limericks. And I suppose he opened a door and said, look, you can write like that, and it doesn't have to be obscure and difficult, a bit like the kind of French surrealists were in the 1940s. It can be for everybody, and everybody can find it funny. So I was quite interested in that right from the very start.
Thank you very much for speaking to us tonight.